The Lost Girls of Panama. Kris Kremers, 21, and Lisanne Froon, 22, who went out for a brief hike near a mountain resort in Panama in 2014 and never came back. Were they victims of a tragic accident or a savage crime? Amid what seems conflicting evidence and botched police work, theories have proliferated, some of them even involving the occult. Welcome to the jungle, specifically, the cloud forests of the Talamanca highlands. It's a rainy Saturday in early June, at the height of the wet season here in northern Panama, and we are, quite literally, on the trail of a deadly international mystery. This mud-slick, root-choked footpath is called the pianista, or piano player, because it climbs, in a series of ladder-like steps reminiscent of a keyboard, up from the tourist town of Boquete to the Continental Divide, at about 6,660 feet. Bright-tailed quetzals flit through dwarf species of cedar, oak, and wild avocado along the trail. At this elevation, the trees are stunted and wind-warped, their twisted limbs draped with moss and epiphytes. The rain is falling in surprisingly cold gusts by the time our small party reaches the Mirador, the overlook at the top of the divide, about 3 hours after leaving the trailhead. On a clear day you can see all the way to Boquete. Today, however, the only thing visible from here is the white sea of mist atop the canopy below.
But the Pianista is known for more than just its pretty birds and haunting vistas. Back in April 2014, two Dutch tourists, Kris Kremers, 21, and Lisanne Froon, 22, disappeared after setting out on this same 3-mile stretch of trail. The women who had come to Boquete to study Spanish and work with children were never seen alive again. Searchers found no trace of them, but a few months later, a member of the indigenous Ngobe tribe turned up in Boquete with Froon's backpack and some of their belongings. A few scattered remains and articles of clothing eventually were recovered near the area where the pack was found. The evidence was sufficient to make a positive DNA match to the victims, but there were not enough remains for examiners to render a conclusive verdict as to cause of death. The lack of hard answers led to a flurry of suspicions, and eventually formal allegations of foul play. The case also spawned a host of bizarre theories and amateur investigations. The deaths of Kris and Lisanne have been blamed on pygmy cannibals, cartel hitmen, and organ traffickers, as well as more conventional explanations, like kidnapping and rape that ends in murder. Boquete's best guide resists buying into any of the gossip and still searches for some hard proof to tell him what happened. Most tourists go up to the Mirador and snap a few selfies. Then they come straight back down the same path to town, says Plinio Montenegro, who grew up in Boquete and led several search parties for Kris and Lisanne in the days after they disappeared. We don't know why Las Holandesas, the Dutch girls, didn't come back down, Plinio tells me, back in Boquete after hiking the Pianista. Above us, the heavy rain hisses on my hotel's A-shaped Swiss chalet-inspired roofing. When something like this happens in a small town, the people of that pueblo feel responsible. We want this to be a safe place for tourists, no matter where they come from. That's why we need to know what really happened to them, so we know who, or what, to blame for their deaths. This investigation was undertaken. Secretly leaked copies of the official case files used by investigators. Those archives contained autopsy reports, data recovered from the electronic devices the women had with them when they went missing, a camera and 2 phones, as well as DNA analysis, maps used in the search, and including Kris Kremers' diary.
Since no independent media have had access to complete case files before, and in the hopes of telling the victim's story as accurately as possible to provide opinions and analysis on this case. By combining their appraisal of the evidence with on-site reporting, we can now make some confident assertions regarding the victim's whereabouts and activities during at least part of the time they were missing, and, as a result, we can also offer new insights into the accident versus foul play controversy. We need to set the record straight for the sake of the victims themselves, as local guide Plinio Montenegro put it. The Hollandesses deserve to have their story told the right way at last. At the time of their disappearance, Kris and Lisanne were on break from their studies back in the Netherlands. Both were outstanding students. They'd first met while working part-time gigs at the same cafe in the southern city of Amersfoort, before deciding to share a flat. They must have made a good team. Kris was the outgoing one, with striking, strawberry blonde hair and cool blue eyes. She was also an amateur actress, and planned to go on to graduate school in art history after her stint in Panama. Lisanne's ash blonde hair was just a few shades darker than her best friend's. And, at 6 feet tall, she was the more athletic of the two. She'd been a volleyball star in college, and had tried her hand at more extreme sports, like skydiving and mountaineering. Froon had an introspective side, too, and had majored in applied psychology back in Amersfoort. She was also a budding amateur photographer. Kris and Lisanne arrived in Panama to serve as volunteer social workers, and to learn fluent Spanish, but someone had miscalculated. Apparently, they arrived in Boquete a week early. The program administrators weren't ready for them, and the assistant instructor had been very rude and not at all friendly about it, as Kris wrote in her diary. There was not yet a place or work for us, so we could not start. The school thought it odd as it was all planned since months ago, Kris wrote. Moments before leaving the room she shared with Lisanne to set out on the fatal hike that morning of April 1, 2014. Tomorrow they will try and get a hold of the head teacher. This was a real disappointment, she wrote, but her final log entry hints that she was already looking forward to putting such cares behind her. Anyway, she advises herself, in the diary's last line, go with the Panamanian flow. The combination of steep terrain and heavy rainfall make for a complex network of fast-running river channels throughout the Talamanca Cordillera. Moist air currents rising from the Pacific dump some 136 inches of rain each year in the region, and the runoff rockets downhill through the jagged, boulder-strewn ravines that dominate the landscape. The Continental Divide, at the top of the Pianista Trail, marks the point where the two regional watersheds change course. On the western side of the divide, the rushing mass of rivers fed by the upland rainforests flow downhill into the Pacific Ocean. Those eastward eventually reach the Caribbean Sea. Boquete sits cupped in a brook-laced valley that protects it from some of the worst storms that blow down from the Cordillera. It's about 40 minutes by car from the base of the still-active volcano called Baru, which is also the site of a national park. The region is known as Little Switzerland for its resemblance to the steep meadows, crystal-clear lakes, and pine forests of the Alps. Local architects have done their part to make the town resemble a snowless version of Zermatt or Grindeld, albeit with a higher percentage of mule traffic on the street. It's also an ecotourism hotspot for birdwatchers and outdoor adventurers of all stripes. And most of these tourist outfits are run both by and for the extranjeros, or foreigners. Sometimes the touristers get lost, but they usually turn up again, or are found by search parties, says our expert on the trails, Plinio Montenegro. Such gringos come back hungry and embarrassed and humbled by the jungle. But at least they come back. The fact that Kris and Lisanne didn't come back is still seen as very strange in and around Boquete. Panama is infamous as an offshore tax haven. And dictator Manuel Noriega, in a U.S. prison since 1989, may once have been at the center of both CIA and drug cartel intrigues. But today Panama is one of the safest countries in Latin America, and idyllic Boquete is thought to be even safer. In the wake of the Kremers Froon tragedy, some observers suggested a connection to the disappearance of a British backpacker named Alex Humphrey, who went missing while staying at a hostel here back in 2009. About 2 months after the disappearance, search parties discovered Kris Kremers' stonewashed jean shorts lying on a narrow tongue of land between two fast-flowing and powerful tributaries. The Ngobe who recovered the shorts claimed to have found them zipped and folded and set on a rock high above the water line, and that rock is on the opposite, or eastern, bank of the tributary from where the night photos were made. If that report is correct, it means at least one of the women, probably Lisanne, made it across the first, westernmost river crossing depicted in the night photos. Kris's jean shorts, according to Vile, might well have been placed at the crossing as a marker, a tactic he's encountered before in similar, lost hiker scenarios. From that point the trail leads over another dangerous cable bridge.
Lisanne's backpack would be found not far from Alto Romero, washed up on the riverbank, and just a few kilometers downstream from Kris's shorts. In the flats between those finger-like river gorges are several semi-abandoned Ngobe structures, which might have provided shelters for the kind of last camps the victims often seek before they are immobilized by hunger and the elements. Lisanne's partial remains would be found 2 months later, gathered up and intermingled with those of her best friend and university roommate, both upstream and downstream from Romero. For that to happen, and assuming foul play is ruled out, she would have had to perish in or very close to the same spot in river that claimed Kris. Some people wouldn't have even tried to cross over and get out, Evile says. Lisanne was an athlete, and her fitness and hand-eye coordination would have helped her negotiate those so-called monkey bridges, which Vile likens to those used in military boot camps worldwide. A week of hunger and exposure, however, would have impacted her muscle control and motor skills. A fall from any of the bridges over these river canyon tributaries could have led to Lisanne's remains being strewn along the Culebra itself. But the most likely culprit might be the very next cable crossing, to the east of where the night photos were made. A fall from that bridge wouldn't necessarily have been fatal in itself, but if indeed she broke her foot or injured herself seriously in any fashion, weakened as she was, that would have made it almost impossible for Lisanne to proceed down the trail, and stranded her in the river system. When the iPhone was turned on for the last time, on April 11th, that may have been her final effort to get some kind of assistance, knowing she could no longer hope to get out on her own power. There is a tale told among the local Ngobe that the ghostly, keening cries of the Hollandessers can still be heard to echo through the canyons above the Rio Culebra in early April, when the rainy season begins. That, of course, is just superstition, another of the many incredible fictions and vicious rumors swirling around this case.
I hope people understand what really happened, and don't blame Boquete, says ace guide Plinio Montenegro, the last time I meet with him. Plinio led a police search party to the headwaters of the Culebra, arriving on or about April 12th, just a day after Kris Kremers' iPhone was powered on for the very last time, according to the leaked phone log. Some will always choose to believe Kris and Lisanne were victims of a criminal assault or even a supernatural event. Others pin the tragedy, far more convincingly, on Panamanian authorities' delayed and haphazard search efforts. A few of the guides I've spoken to in Boquete even fault themselves because they were unable to find or save the women. A source close to the families says they still yearn for answers and closure, having only accepted authorities' account for lack of further recourse. But Plinio, who knows the dangers and the beauty of the cloud forests as well as anyone, calls this a story with no real villain. The only thing, he says, when is the jungle itself?